Hi everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Silhouette Secrets Plus, and today I am going to show you how you can easily in the Silhouette Studio software create a triple mat technique. Now first I have to credit this to my Facebook group admin, Teresa P. I was headed out on vacation and she shared this project in the group and it was a fabulous project. So we are creating a tutorial for you. So this is what we are going to create and end up with. And I'm going to show you how you can do that in the Silhouette Studio software using a really neat feature that Teresa did. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm working with a standard card size in the US, which is 4.25 by 5.5 inches. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my page, and you want to make sure my page is already set up, but I'm going to show you how I did it. In the top right corner is your page setup panel. I am using a letter size sheet of paper when I go to print, and I prefer to print and cut in the portrait orientation for best results. The white part here is my transparency. You can slide that over if you like to design with it showing the grid. For this project, I don't need that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating my card. I'm just creating a stacked image that I can add to the front of a card base. And I will include links in the description below to the tools and the techniques that I am mentioning in this video. So I'm going to start with the drawing tools on the left side. I'm just going to come over, click it, draw a rectangle. It does not have to be a specific size because we're going to resize it. To resize the rectangle, you can do so by using the quick access toolbar in the top. This is a fluid toolbar designed to show the tools that you use most often with the object selected. So currently I have a design selected, so it's going to show me my scale options, my move by, centering options, different things like that. If I had text selected, it would show me my text style properties. So it is fluid and depends on what you have selected on your screen. If nothing is selected, you're going to see that there is no toolbar active. It just shows you a few options on the left. So I'm going to also show you under the transform panel on the right hand side. If you click the three bars with the line through it, then you have your scale tab is the second tab at the top. You have all the same options that you have in your quick access toolbar and your icons match. So you can use it in either place. So for right now, we just drew a random sized rectangle. I'm going to use my scale tools and I'm going to change that to a width of 5.5 and a height of 4.25. So that's going to adjust. This is going to be our bottom layer. We're going to make 5 more copies and change the size on each of those copies. To make a copy, you can do it about 10 different ways in the Silhouette Studio software, and it's whatever works for you and what you're most comfortable with. You can right click, choose copy and paste. You can choose Control C, Control V. My favorite way to do it is to hold down the Alt key on my Windows computer. If you're on a Mac, it's the Option key. You'll see that my cursor changed to a plus sign, which means I can drag a copy away. When you hold your Alt key down or Option key, when you move over that red line, it gives you the option, and then you left click on your mouse and drag that copy away. So that's my favorite method to do it. So for this one, we're going to decrease the size, and we're going to decrease the size as we go along. So I'm going to choose 5.25 by 4 inches, and then I'm going to hold my Alt key down, drag another copy. This one, I'm going to change the size to 4.5 inches by 3.25 inches. I'm going to hold my Alt key down, drag another copy off, and we're going to change the size to 4.25 by 3 inches. I'm going to do this again, hold my Alt key down, drag a copy off, and I'm going to change the size to 3.5 by 2.25. And I'm hitting enter after I enter those numbers. One more time, I'm going to hold my Alt key down and I'm going to drag a copy away. This one I'm going to change to 3.25 by 2 inches. So now I have 6 copies that are different sizes. This is going to create our stacked technique. So our triple mat stacked technique. So here's our top layer that I have the first rectangle. I'm going to click on this next rectangle here, and I'm going to choose every other rectangle. So I have my back, I have the middle, and I have this one. I'm going to change the color of these so they show as black. And then what I can do is I can move them off. These are going to be our mats. So we're going to add our printed design onto these mats to create this stacked layered look. And we're going to use some dimensional tape in order to bump that up as the original image showed. So these are going to be what our pattern is, what we use in the pattern fill. So I'm going to left click and drag across all of these, and I'm going to center them together. And then this is where the neat technique comes in. We're going to use compound paths, but it's not in the typical fashion that we see a compound path explained or used. So I'm going to put more information in the description below on compound paths, but understand that we're using it in a little bit different way here. Okay, now that I have my rectangles all selected and I've used the center option, so they're all centered together, I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to choose Make Compound Path. Now, here's where this compound path we're not using it in the typical fashion that we see. So I am going to make that a compound path, and what it does is it makes this all three of those rectangles combined into one object, one design. So what you need to do is watch on the screen to see how this works, because it's really a neat technique. It's very difficult to describe what it's going to do. But I'm going to come down here to this little arrow, and I'm going to click on it. It's the Show Hide Library. And so I'm going to click on that. It brings up my split screen for my library. So on the left-hand side, you have your library options, and on the right-hand side, you have your design screen. It's not something I typically design in, but it works really great when you're working with patterns. So I'm going to close this transform panel so you can kind of see this a little bit easier. Now, patterns can be found down here in this patterns folder, and you can, if you have designer edition or higher, you can actually add patterns. Something to keep in mind about patterns is they are JPEG or PNG files typically. There's a few other file types you can use, but those are photo files and they can be quite large. So you can add patterns to it by dragging and dropping from wherever you have a JPEG or a PNG saved on your computer. But keep in mind that your library is limited in storage, so you cannot have thousands and thousands of patterns because those are large files. They take up space. So you want to keep that in mind when you're adding patterns into your library. The Silhouette Design Store patterns do not count against that file storage. Silhouette Design Store files do not count against your cloud storage. So something to keep in mind when you're working with that. So if I click on my patterns folder, you can see I have almost 500 patterns that either I've added or are from the design store, and you can choose those. I chose to narrow it down. I chose a pattern and I clicked on the Add to Favorites and this little star here. And when you do that, I'll just click on this one here. When you do that, it adds it to this little favorites folder in your top left menu. So if I click on that, and then I had already chosen to sort it by different file types. So if I come up here to the file types and uncheck select all, and then I choose only the printable patterns, it's going to show you the printable patterns that I have favorited. So it's an easy way when you're working with a project, you can favorite that and you can find that design a little bit easier. Now the design we're going to be working with here, and since I selected that apricot, you can see it filled it. What I'm going to be working with is actually this vintage pink rose pattern. So if I click on that little square icon that shows up when you move your mouse over it, it is design number 401636. And we're going to be using it because of this rose pattern. So since I selected that, it then filled the pattern in my design that I had selected on the screen. Now it looks a little bit odd here, but hang on just a second, you'll see the magic happen. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close this show library so that you can see fully on the screen. And then what I'm going to come over here to do is choose this fill panel. And on the top, the third tab at the top is your fill pattern where all your patterns show up. And this is where you can see all these little icons show up really tiny versus seeing a bigger icon in this show library area. So you can choose your pattern a little bit easier and see it a little bit easier when you use the show library versus choosing from this little small icon in your fill pattern. But we can still do some adjustments to our pattern or to our design to change the look up a little bit. So you're going to click on this advanced options, and you can choose to pan your pattern. So if I click that, get a little control icon in the middle, and I can choose to pan it. What you're going to notice is that I have this, there's like a crossed section. It's a tiling, so it's already tiled this. That's the edge of my paper. So I want to make sure to keep that off of my design, otherwise it's going to have white lines through the design when it's printed. In this case, it scaled it to our shape. What we can come down here to is we can come down to the scale option. We can increase that just a little bit, and then we can choose the pan pattern, and we can adjust that. Watch for those white lines so you know where the edge is, and we can adjust that so we can scale that rose pattern up just a little bit in our design. You can adjust that and play with that all you want to create different unique looks. Now here's where the magic happens, and I had to watch Teresa's video very carefully to see how this was done, because it's not something I normally would use or even try. So if I right click on this and I choose release compound path, it's going to break that design up, but it's going to keep that pattern fill in that rectangle exactly where it was placed. So it actually fills the pattern into all three of my rectangles in the exact location that it was on that rectangle. So what we can do here is to show you what the end result is going to look like. I can put this design back together. So I have, this is my base. Now since we did the release compound path and make compound path, it also reorders the layers that this was in, which is just fine. We can work with that. So what I can do is I can bring this here and select both. If I center those and then I group them together, so right click and choose group, it's going to bring them back together. So they're back to in the same level on the layers. The black is behind the rose on the front. And then I can do the same thing, select this rectangle and the pattern rectangle that it matches, center those. If I right click and choose group, it's going to reorder those as well. Select my black mat and my large rectangle, center those, right click and choose group. So now what I have, if I select everything, center those, I have my stacked dimensional card front. It's a really neat technique that can be accomplished in the Silhouette Studio software. It was created, most of the time you see it with stamping, and you stamp your images on 3 different layers, and then you can add those mats to the back of them and it creates a dimensional look. So this is how it's going to look when we get to our finished project. It's going to have a little bit dimension if we use foam tape to pop it up a little bit. But you can see if we zoom in here, the image lines up exactly. So there's a little bit of a break there, but it's been taken out of that image. So when you pop it up, it's going to give it that 3D look. Now what I can do is I can select all of them and I can right click and choose ungroup, and that's going to ungroup everything from that photo mat. So we can move our mats off the screen again. So these are our black mats to our design. You can cut those out of black cardstock. Since this is a printed pattern, this is going to be a portion for a print and cut. So I'm going to come up here to my page setup panel, and I'm going to show you how I set that up. I have a letter size sheet of paper, which is what I'm printing on, and I have it set to the portrait orientation. I'm going to click on the third tab at the top, which is your registration marks tab, and I'm going to choose on. So it's going to put those registration marks on for me. Your registration marks are these 3 black marks. So I have a square in the top left, and I have 2 L brackets, and this is how the Cameo can read where your design is on the screen. You want to keep your design outside of the cross-hatched area. And in some cases, especially with a dark design, you want to keep your design completely out of this area, even between the cross-hatched area. Now, I'll also link up a description or a tutorial for basic print and cut. I do recommend, especially if you're just starting or you've never done print and cut before, that you use all the default registration marks. Use all the defaults to get started and establish a baseline. Not everybody can adjust the registration marks and still get an accurate print and cut. So I'm going to just adjust this on my screen, and in this case, you can see it overlaps a little bit. As long as my pattern stays the exact same way I want, I can come over here and I can use the transform panel, my rotate tab, and I can rotate that whole thing to fit onto my sheet of paper. Since I have some excess space over here, I'm just going to move it into the center of my page. And that's how you set up a print and cut. I do want to specify page setup panel, your registration marks panel is at the top, the third tab at the top, turn it on. If you have ever changed your registration marks, adjusted them out, or if you have opened a file that had registration marks on it, I highly recommend you click Restore Defaults. Click the Restore Defaults, print that on copy paper or cardstock to do a test print to make sure that your machine is cutting accurately. This is where I get the best results for print and cut. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and print it on a sheet of cardstock. So I'm going to go to File, Print. I'm using version 4.4.552, which brings up the print preview. And you can see all my registration marks are showing. I'm going to click on Print, and this is where I can choose my printer and I can tell it how I want it to print. So for me, I'm going to click on Preferences. You can also find some of these options under Advanced. I always click the preview before printing, because even though I've seen this print preview on the screen, I've caught errors before I've wasted paper or ink when I go to see the actual print preview of the printer. It is an extra step. It takes a few seconds longer, but it saves some ink in the long run. I'm also going to choose my rear tray because I'm printing on cardstock, which feeds better in most printers through a rear tray where it doesn't have to bend and fold through the printer. So I'm feeding through the rear tray, and I always have to select it in my printer. So I'm going to choose rear tray, and I just print on plain paper, standard quality. If you're printing on photo paper or any other larger cardstock like by 12 by 12, I know my printer, if I print on 12 by 12 cardstock, it makes me change the settings to high quality. So just keep that in mind, whatever media you're printing on, choose that. I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to choose Print. And then what that's going to do is it's going to bring up my print preview for my printer. And I can double check that my registration marks are going to print. You want to double check that this bottom left registration mark is going to print and is not outside of your print borders. If I'm happy, I can go ahead and choose Start Printing. And then I have my full printed sheet. We're going to jump over to my Cameo machine and get that set up to cut. Okay, so I have my printed sheet of cardstock, and then I have my Silhouette cutting mat. I'm going to carefully remove the blue protective cover, and I'm going to place my printed page exactly in the same way it shows on the screen. So I'm going to place it in the top left corner of my cutting mat, and it's going to be on top of the grid lines. You do not want your grid lines showing. It has to match exactly how you have it on your screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this in my cutting mat, in my cutting machine. So I'm using a Cameo 4. I'm going to place the left edge along next to the line on the left, and my rollers are on the edges of my cutting mat. I'm going to press the load button. And if you do run into issues with print and cut, you might try holding your mat up when it, or level, at least level, and up when you do a print and cut. This may help it see those registration marks a little bit easier. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back over to my software. And we have our print and cut all set up. I'm going to click on Send in the top right corner. And it's going to show the last material that I cut, which was Heat Transfer Smooth. I'm going to wait for my machine to show up as available. If I need to, I can select down here in my machines list, and I can choose the machine that shows available. I use my Cameo 4 on Bluetooth most times. I rarely have an issue with it. So what I'm going to do, but I find if I choose my USB connection, even though it's not connected, it's not hooked up by USB, if I choose that and then I go back and choose my Bluetooth connection, it sometimes will pick it up faster. See, it picked it up almost immediately. It's connecting and it's going to be syncing. Now with the Cameo 4 Portrait 3 models, since they were released, until that machine is connected and recognized, it will not bring up your settings. It will give you an error. So what I want to do here is I want to choose my material, which is cardstock, and I use cardstock textured for almost all of my cardstock I cut. I printed on Recollections white cardstock. I do know that my blade is old. I've used it a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chew up my blade depth just by 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and send this to cut. And what it's going to do is it's going to read those registration marks. It reads each of those marks, and if you watch your machine, there's a little optical eye that turns on when you have registration marks present on your design, and it is reading exactly the location. So when that moves down on that mark, it reads down and it reads over on the left. So if for somebody who has decreased those registration marks, if it is not cutting accurately, try the restore defaults so it prints them larger and it can find it easier. It's just an optical eye that turns on under the machine. The other thing to know is if you're having issues and you have ever used spray adhesive or any other kind of, or your machine is really super dirty, the optical eye is under this little housing here. And if you have debris, adhesive, dirt, fibers, anything like that building up in your machine, it's going to affect that optical eye because it's going to block that eye. There's really no easy way to clean that. The best way is to not restick your cutting mats, not use spray adhesives near your machine, and to keep your machine clean. Those are some extra tips there. So what I'm going to do now is I know it cut. I can go ahead and check that. Going to reach over here to the right hand side, and I'm going to press the unload button, and then I'm going to flip my mat over. And this is important for cardstock, or if you have a particularly new mat. This is going to help you from your paper curling. So I place my blue protective cover down on my table, and then I'm going to peel my mat away from my cardstock. It's going to help the paper not to curl, and then I can just add my next layer of cardstock. So we're going to be cutting the black, and I'm just going to place that on my cutting mat. And then I'm going to load that into my machine. So I'm going to press the load button, and then I'm going to switch back over to my Silhouette Studio software. I'm going to click on the design, And what I can actually do is I'm going to select my 3 black mats. I'm going to choose Control C, and I'm going to open a new design mat. The new design mat has the letter setting already set up, but you can change that if needed. I'm going to choose Control V. It's going to paste those. So then I can just, without having to undo the registration marks, I can just choose a new mat. And I always try to conserve space. Sometimes that takes longer in the long run than to get your project done, but I just use the rotate option again under the transform panel to rotate that up into the corner. And then I'm going to choose send. I want to verify my settings, so cardstock, textured, and I'm going to double check here. That looks like it is the preset. I told you my blade is very, very well used, so I'm going to increase that to a 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and click send. And it's going to cut out our mats. And then once it's done, I can go ahead and check that cut. It cut well. I'm going to go unload my mat. Once again, I'm going to flip my mat over, and I'm going to peel my mat away from my cardstock. The Silhouette mats are very flexible, so you can peel those back without it breaking. Other cutting mats are not. So then I'm going to some areas that might just need to be popped out. So now I have my 3 mats, and I have my 3 parts to my design. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this together. I'm just going to cover up my mat. I always keep my mat covered whenever I'm not working with it. That helps to keep the debris, and it helps my mat last longer. I'll just sit that underneath my mat. So then what I need now, so this is just the front, our stacked technique that we are going to add onto the front of a card base. So I'm going to grab some adhesive. So I'm using a tape runner. This is the one that I prefer. I've been using it for, I don't know, over 10 years now. And then this is dimensional foam. And I will put links up to both of these in the description as well. And a pair of scissors. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just start by adding my mat onto my image. So I'm just going to use my tape runner. You do not have to cover the entire thing with tape. Just like when you're teaching kids with glue sticks, you do not have to cover the entire surface, just enough to keep it well stuck down. And I'm going to add my next one. So I'm just going to give it some tape in the corners, maybe one in the middle, and I'm going to add that. Then I have 2 parts. I'm going to grab my large piece and then add that to my mat as well. So now I have my 3 pieces. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, this is dimensional tape, it's foam tape. So if you look here, it has a little bit of dimension on it. And again, you don't have to cover the whole surface. So I'm just going to cut off a chunk, and I'm going to start with this middle one. And I'm just going to, you want to give it enough to support it. So I'm going to do the corners. And you probably don't even need pieces that big. I tend to be very conservative on my foam tape, just enough to keep it stuck down and support in the middle so it doesn't warp or fold down in the middle. So it's going to look like this. It's going to bump it up off of that cardstock. You don't want it to fall down, which actually once I put that on there, I'm going to add 2 more pieces just here to keep it supported. And then I'll just place that back on there, and I can peel the protective cover off. And then I'm going to line it up. Might be easier to line it up if you're standing up. Press it down. And you're going to do the same thing for the front. And you can put it back on if you have an extra piece. Take the protective cover off. And then line it up. And then you are ready for the last step. So you're going to add this to the front of a card base. So I just have a card base here. You can either buy pre-made card bases or you can create your own. So I'm just going to fold this in half. And then what you can do is you can either add it flat to the front, or you could use dimensional tape as well to add it. I'm just going to add it flat to the card. Makes it just a little bit easier to mail. You do want to keep in mind, and post office rules are different in the US versus international, so that makes a difference as well. So I'm just going to add that to the front of my card base, secure it down really well, and we have our stacked technique. So here is our finished card. It has dimension to it. It has that triple matte technique, which is often seen with stamping. So we've created that using the fill pattern option in the Silhouette Studio software. I will throw up links to all the supplies and tutorials for further information on some of the tools and techniques that we used in this video. And I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Teresa, who's my admin in my Silhouette Secrets with Ellie Mae Facebook group. She was playing with this and created that little technique with the compound path that worked out really, really slick in how to create this design. Look for some more design options coming soon. I thank you for joining me. Have a great day, and I can't wait to see what you create.